Picture this. You're thin. You've never struggled with your weight, and yet a hidden fat could be quietly growing inside you, all the way into your tongue. Yes, you heard that right. Your tongue. Researchers recently discovered that a type of fat once believed to only affect overweight people can actually settle into the tissue of a thin woman's tongue, to the point of causing snoring, and eventually sleep apnea. And that's just the beginning. That same fat has now been linked, in a study following thousands of women over 13 years, to a 3 times higher risk of breast cancer. And not just breast cancer, 14 other cancers are connected to it too. The good news? This fat is not a life sentence. It responds to what you eat, what you drink, and even to cold exposure. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how this fat works, why it's so dangerous, and most importantly, how simple foods you probably already have in your kitchen, can shut it down. Stick around until the end because the last tip, involving a fermented tea from a small town in southern China, is probably the least known and the most powerful. Part 1. The skinny fat trap. We often assume that being thin means being healthy, but there's a phenomenon researchers call skinny fat. People who look perfectly normal on the scale, yet carry a significant amount of visceral fat, the deep fat that wraps around internal organs. A team at Cornell University in New York studied this exact phenomenon in young Swedish women, either thin or of normal weight. Using precise imaging scans to measure their body fat, the researchers made a surprising discovery. In some women who were gaining weight, the fat wasn't only settling around the belly. It was also building up in the tongue. The real-world consequence: during sleep, when muscles relax, a heavier, fattier tongue further blocks the airway. Partners started noticing unusual snoring, and in several of these women, it progressed into full-blown sleep apnea. This detail overturns a common assumption. We used to think sleep apnea was only caused by a narrowing airway, like a pipe being squeezed from the outside. In reality, it's not just the tunnel narrowing. Sometimes it's the organ itself, the tongue, that grows larger and blocks the passage from within. And this so-called visceral fat doesn't just get in the way of breathing. It's metabolically active, almost like a small chemical factory installed inside the body. Unlike subcutaneous fat, the kind you can pinch under the skin around your hips or thighs, visceral fat wraps directly around organs, the liver, the intestines, the pancreas, and continuously releases inflammatory substances straight into the bloodstream. That fundamental difference explains why two people who weigh exactly the same on the scale can have radically different health profiles. One might carry mostly subcutaneous fat, relatively harmless. The other might be hiding, under a slim frame, a much more concerning buildup of visceral fat. That's precisely the profile of the skinny fat women studied by the Cornell researchers. Part 2. The cancer connection. This is where things get genuinely concerning. A large-scale study followed over 3,000 women for 13 years. None of these women were obese. None were even technically overweight. These were women of normal body size, some slimmer than others, but all had undergone a precise body composition scan at the start of the study. 13 years later, the finding was unmistakable. Women who had excess visceral fat at baseline, even fat that was completely invisible to the naked eye, had a 3-fold higher risk of developing breast cancer compared to women with normal fat levels. How can such a gap be explained? Inflammation. Visceral fat continuously releases inflammatory markers into the blood, and the human body works a bit like a suitcase. Its capacity is limited. When fat accumulates inside without room to expand, it literally leaks inflammatory substances into surrounding organs. And inflammation, in the context of cancer, acts as an accelerant. Think of a campfire that's almost out at the end of the night, just embers left. Pour a bit of gasoline on it and it roars back to life instantly. That's exactly what inflammation does to a tumor, even a microscopic one, even one you'd never notice. It turns dormant embers into a raging fire. That's why excess visceral fat is now linked not just to breast cancer, but to 14 other types of cancer: colon, ovarian, lung, prostate, and the list keeps growing as research advances. Part 3. The fix. Turning on your internator heater. Here's the encouraging part of this story. The human body has a built-in mechanism capable of neutralizing this dangerous fat. It's called brown fat. Unlike white fat, which stores energy, brown fat actively burns it, functioning almost like a small internal radiator. Certain natural compounds in our food can literally wake up this brown fat and prompt it to use excess visceral fat as fuel. How does this mechanism actually kick in? It starts with a shock, like exposure to cold. That shock triggers the release of two well-known hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones activate a specific receptor called the beta-3 adrenergic receptor, found notably in brown fat. Fun fact, that same receptor also exists in the bladder, where it plays a completely different role, helping the bladder contract. That's actually why some medications originally designed to treat bladder spasms accidentally revealed their ability to activate brown fat during trials run by US researchers. This obviously isn't a recommended method. The doses used in those trials were far higher than what's prescribed for standard medical use. But that discovery opened up an exciting question. Aside from medication and cold exposure, what else can activate that same receptor? Once that receptor is switched on, a second step kicks in inside the cells: the activation of a protein called UCP1, or uncoupling protein 1. This protein works directly on mitochondria, those tiny structures inside our cells, especially abundant in brown fat, that function as miniature power plants. Picture these mitochondria like the pilot light on a gas stove. As long as it's not lit, nothing happens. But the moment a signal arrives, cold, a hormone, a compound from food, it's like striking a match. Combustion begins, and stored fat starts being burned for heat instead of just sitting there as stored energy. These mitochondria naturally contain a lot of iron, and oxidized iron turns brown. Lots of mitochondria, lots of iron, lots of oxidation, and that's exactly why brown fat is, well, brown. So anything that can activate the beta-3 receptor, trigger UCP1, or directly energize the mitochondria essentially flips the switch on this internal heater. Part 4. Foods that attack visceral fat. This is exactly what several recent studies on everyday foods have revealed. Green tea tops the list. In a study where participants drank green tea at breakfast, lunch, and in the afternoon, the results after 8 weeks were striking. An average weight loss of about 2 pounds, but more importantly, a waist circumference reduction of nearly an inch. That number matters because it directly reflects a decrease in visceral fat. The benefits didn't stop there. Women who drank green tea also showed lower blood pressure, improved fasting glucose, and a better cholesterol profile. All signs of improved metabolic health, particularly useful for anyone dealing with fatty liver disease. A study from Tehran University of Medical Sciences, involving 63 adults aged 35 to 65, all overweight and living with type 2 diabetes, confirmed this trend. After 2 months of drinking 4 cups of green tea daily, participants lost an average of about 3 pounds, but more notably, nearly 2 inches off their waist circumference. That's roughly the equivalent of tightening a belt by 2 notches. Matcha, the vivid green tea often associated with sushi restaurants, takes things a step further. Unlike regular green tea, where only steeped leaves release their compounds into the water, matcha is consumed as a powder made from the entire ground leaf. The result? You absorb all the polyphenols, all the catechins, and all the dietary fiber from the leaf, a real bonus for gut health and metabolic health. Oolong tea, commonly found at Chinese restaurants, sits somewhere between green and black tea. Lightly oxidized, with a rounder flavor, it still retains a meaningful amount of active catechins involved in fat burning. And for those looking to go even further, there's pu-erh tea. originating from a small town in southwest China that lent the tea its name. This fermented black tea was traditionally compressed into bricks and transported along ancient trading routes, precisely because fermentation allowed it to travel long distances without spoiling. Researchers discovered that this fermentation process is actually its biggest strength. Pu-erh contains catechins, of course, but it also functions as a probiotic tea, hosting beneficial bacteria that improve metabolism from the inside out. Part 5. Mistakes that are holding back your results. Before wrapping up, let's talk about the most common mistakes, the ones that keep people from seeing results despite their efforts. Mistake number 1. Ignoring timing. The exact same food, eaten at different times of day, doesn't have the same metabolic impact. Your body doesn't process a meal the same way in the morning as it does late at night, when metabolism naturally slows down in preparation for sleep. So it's not just what you put on your plate that matters, it's also when you eat it. Mistake number 2. Chasing a single miracle solution. No single food, no matter how powerful, works alone like a magic wand. It's the daily repetition of simple habits, a cup of green tea in the morning, a serving of cruciferous vegetables at lunch, reasonable cold exposure that, added together over time, produces a measurable change in waist circumference and blood markers. Mistake number 3. Trying to force the process with dangerous shortcuts. As mentioned earlier, certain repurposed medications can artificially activate brown fat, but at doses that carry real health risks. The dietary approach, though slower, remains both safer and far more sustainable. Finally, remember that deprivation is never the right strategy. The studies we just covered don't talk about restrictive diets. They talk about smart additions. One more drink, one more ingredient, one more habit. It's this approach of adding rather than subtracting that makes these changes actually stick long-term. Conclusion. The key takeaways. Visceral fat isn't just a matter of appearance. It's an active tissue capable of disrupting your sleep, silently inflaming your body, and significantly increasing the risk of several cancers, even in thin people. But your body has a natural ally, brown fat, that internal heater, which can be activated not just by cold, but by simple, accessible foods. The takeaway isn't to restrict yourself, it's to choose, in reasonable amounts and at the right time, foods that work for you. Green tea, matcha, oolong, pu-erh, each one flipping this natural fat-burning switch in its own way. So it's not just about quantity, it's about what you eat, how you eat it, and most importantly, when you eat it. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and definitely check out this next video. It goes even deeper into this topic. End of script.